This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
Presenting the Archive. Classic episodes that remain timeless. The raw, unfiltered conversations from the early days in which people shared their failures and showed us exactly how they rebuilt everything from the ground up.
In my opinion, the biggest obstacle to taking ownership of things is your ego. It's your ego because it hurts. If you have the hard conversations earlier, they're easier. They're less hostile. The further you go down the path without putting corrective measures on someone, the harder that conversation is going to be. The way I always handled extreme micromanagers was I gave them more information than they could possibly want. I gave them so much information and control that they didn't even want that control anymore. Is there really such a thing as superpowers? My first thought was no. And then I said, yes, there is. Jiujitsu. It's like a superpower because you can defeat people and you don't have to cower down to them. When you look at your own life, there's not too many people that are in a worse situation, at least in America, of being locked in a 2-foot-tall bamboo cage with their feet shackled and having rats gnaw at their wounds.
So I'm here with Jocko Willink. Jocko, welcome. First off, Extreme Ownership, How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win. And your new book, it's a kid's novel, Way of the Warrior Kid, From Wimpy to Warrior, the Navy SEAL Way. Congrats on this book. This is the last book I would expect you to write. So congrats on this.
Yeah, I had to convince my publisher that I should do that.
And was he like, Jock, are you fucking insane?
Yeah, he was kind of like that because, well, you've written a bunch of books, so you know this, but he was telling me, hey, what you write is kind of who you are, and you just can't do these random things. People are going to expect a certain thing from you, and you just can't change it.
And they want to put you in a bucket.
Right.
And I hate that, but go ahead. So how did you convince him?
Well, that book did really well. Extreme Ownership did really well. And
Number one New York Times bestseller.
Yep. And then my podcast did really well. And my publisher actually called me and said, hey, Jocko, your podcast is another book. You can put that thing in a book form. It's awesome. He loves the podcast. And I was kind of already going down that road. And I was actually going to self-publish it because I just wanted to get it out quick. People were asking me the same questions a bunch. I just wanted to get that information out there. And he says, no, let us publish it. We can do a really good job. And I said, well, publish that because I literally had already given him the kid's book. Not completed, but I gave him, hey, this is the next thing I'm going to do. I said, okay, I'll do the podcast book with you. First, we do the kid's book. And he said, well, let's do it.
All right. That's a good way to do it. You're a negotiator.
Yeah.
So Jack, I just want to give a little bio and you could add to it. You were in the Navy SEALs for, I'm guessing, about 14, 15 years?
20
years.
Yep.
You were deployed to Iraq. And as shown in this book, Extreme Ownership, you were in a lot of heavy, dangerous, heavy fire situations where they were the ultimate high stakes. You lost friends. You had gunfire all around you. You had your SEAL unit there and you had to make lots of kind of life and death decisions under the line of fire, under fire in dangerous situations. You had to decide whether you're going to shoot this group or deal with this group. It was pretty scary reading some of the situations you were in. It was a page turner. But out of that, you cultivated all of these leadership lessons that you now apply in your company, Echelon Front, where you help businesses kind of deal with leadership issues. And I just want to express a lot of these leadership issues you discovered on the battlefield, again, in these high stakes situations. But these leadership lessons really are useful for anybody, career, relationships, just life decisions in general, developing a code in general. But I have to admit, I was a bit nervous coming in to interview you because I feel like you see this cover on the Way of the Warrior Kid? Like I can't do a pull-up, and I never been in the battlefield, obviously, or I would look completely different. And I don't know, I was just nervous about it. Like maybe you would judge me for that somehow. I've been under adversity, incredible adversity,
right,
but not with anybody shooting a gun at me.
Yeah, well, I think that, that kid in that book, the character's name is Mark, and I think that's representative of most kids. Most kids, being a kid's not easy. You're transforming and becoming a human being where, at some point you have everyone taking care of you and protecting you, and then all of a sudden you're out in the world. And so everybody goes through that hard time where pull-ups is one example, but what could, this kid not do? This kid couldn't win the spelling bee and was ashamed of it. And that the kid in the book doesn't know his times tables. And that's taken directly from one of my kids, that she didn't know her times tables, and she was so frustrated about not knowing her times tables. And, I don't know if depressed is a strong word, but all of a sudden she thought she was stupid. And I said to her, well, have you studied? What method are you using to study? And she says, she's in 4th grade or something. She says, no, what do you mean? And I said, well, you need to study to learn them. You just can't know them. The world, you just don't know things. The software doesn't come in the brain. You have to program it.
That's a lesson that needs to be learned, though.
Exactly. And so then I said, oh, okay, well, let's sit down. We'll make flashcards. And then in, a half an hour, she knew all of her times tables. But it's a lesson that has to be learned. And that's one of the lessons that's in the book. And again, you can apply that to anything. If it's learning a language, if you're struggling with certain areas in school, certain subjects in school, you need to study. You're not just going to know them.
So I'm going to go backwards and forwards in time. So it strikes me like there was 1 or 2 situations when you were in Iraq and somebody in your unit or friendly unit sees potential enemy soldiers that you could potentially, your guys, and actually specifically Chris Kyle, who's the figure American Sniper is based on, could take out before the enemy guys could take you out. And you had to just make a decision. Are these friendly guys or are they enemy soldiers? And all the evidence seemed to point that they were enemy soldiers. And ultimately, though, you paused enough to get more information where every second counted, and you determined, fortunately, that they were friendlies and not enemies. And it strikes me that that's the sort of situation you can't just, again, like the times table, you're not born knowing, oh, I need to pause a little bit more here. Like there was something in your gut based on experience that told you, no, I needed to gather more information. So how did you kind of start to learn these lessons?
Well, and actually, just a little correction here. That particular chapter, the book Extreme Ownership, was written by myself and a guy named Leif Babin, who was a guy that worked for me in the Battle of Ramadi. He was one of the 2 SEAL platoon commanders that was part of Task Unit Bruiser. And so that was actually him in that particular situation. And that was representative of the decisions that my guys, all of them, were making all the time on the battlefield. And there's a bunch of little techniques that you have to get accustomed to make those decisions. And one thing I talk about all the time is having the ability to detach yourself from the situation and not get totally wrapped up in the emotion. I mean, in that particular situation, the Army guys were telling Leif, take the shot, kill these guys. These are bad guys. Kill, take the shot, take the shot. And Leif just had to step back and say, okay, let me think about this first before I tell Chris to take the shot. Because trust me, if Chris is taking the shot, someone's getting killed. I mean, he was a very effective sniper. And even Chris didn't feel comfortable with it. That's why Chris was asking the question. So the question started with Chris because Chris didn't need our authority to take the shot. None of our snipers, none of our machine gunners did. They knew what the intent of the operations were. So if they were asking a question, they had a concern. And so that gives us a concern right away.
What do you think his concern was? Like, was it a gut thing or did he notice something unusual?
He couldn't positively identify the target. And if we can't positively identify the target, then we're not going to take the shot, especially in a moment when there's friendly forces maneuvering around the battlefield. And again, if you remember the first chapter of the book, it's a situation that goes bad. And there's what we call a blue on blue, a fratricide, where one of my SEALs shot and killed a friendly Iraqi soldier, and the big firefight broke out, and it was a nightmare. And that happened within a couple weeks of being on deployment. In my opinion, the worst thing that can happen in combat is friendly fire death, is fratricide, when you kill your brother. That's the worst thing that can happen. And so we'd had that lesson early in deployment. So everybody had that in the back of their mind. So if they weren't 100% sure about a shot, they would try and figure out what get more clarity on the situation so that they can make a good decision.
So that first chapter was very interesting because it sort of leads to the title of the book and kind of pervades the lessons from the rest of the book, but also pervades leadership lessons in every area of life. And so your book's called Extreme Ownership. And in that particular chapter, in the postmortem, people wanted to know essentially who's to blame. I'm just putting it like simply, who's to blame? And a lot of people were saying they were to blame. Let's say the person who fired the gun, or let's say the person who identified someone who could potentially be an enemy. But you stood up there as the commander and said, no, I'm to blame. Here are the things where I could have done it better. And so this idea of extreme ownership, both when you're managing down and managing up, becomes extremely important. I think this is important in the workplace. It's important in, if you're writing a book. It's important if you're any endeavor, right? Important in life. So maybe define it a little bit more, outside the battlefield.
Yeah, it's what you said. It's a mindset where you're not going to blame anybody else. You're not going to blame anything else. You're going to take ownership when there's a problem, and you're going to get the problem solved. It's that simple. So many people in so many different situations, in business and in life, when something's not going their way, they say, oh, the market turned against me, so that's not my fault. Or my competitor did things I didn't expect them to do, so that's not my fault, and that's why we're losing money this quarter. Or in their life, they say, I'm out of shape, but that's because I hurt my knee, 3 months ago, and so I haven't been able to work out because it's been making me limp. And so all you're doing is blaming other people or other things for things that are going wrong in your life. And all those situations, if you won't solve those situations if you don't take ownership of them. So if the market changed and you say, hey, the market changed, there's nothing I can do about it. Well, guess what? You're a business person. Yes, there are things you can do about it when the market changed. First of all, you can have contingency plans set up. Second of all, you can have multiple different streams of incomes and other possibilities of making things happen, or you can react quickly when the market turns. There's things that you can do proactively to overcome those setbacks. Same thing with an injury. Oh, my knee's hurt. Okay, so what can I do now? Nothing? Does that require couch sitting for the next 6 months and eating Doritos? Negative, actually. It means you can work out with one leg. Maybe you can swim. Maybe you can do a bunch of pull-ups and work your upper body strength. But you can't just put the excuse on, I hurt my leg, therefore I'm going to turn into a couch potato. And so it happens in life and it happens in business. And with both those, like I said, if you don't take ownership of them, they're not going to change. The problems aren't going to solve themselves.
So it seems like the idea of, putting blame on something is a very evolutionary idea in the sense that something stresses us out. Like, let's say, oh, I can't exercise or my business didn't do well. So that's an extreme stress. And there's two ways to relieve the stress. One is to find a solution and say, okay, now I'm going to move forward and hopefully things will be better with this new plan. But another way to relieve stress is to blame. And so it's a very natural thing, natural habit that people build over decades to relieve stress through blame. And because then that releases the cortisol, it spikes up dopamine or whatever, you want to call it. So the first step, it seems to me, is not to say, okay, well, Jocko said I can't blame. The first step is to kind of figure out, well, I must have this habit of blaming. How do I get over this habit?
In my opinion, the biggest obstacle to taking ownership of things is your ego. It's your ego because it hurts. Even in that situation in the book,
right?
When, I'd spent at that point 15 or 16 years in the SEAL teams. It was my whole life. I'd built up a fairly solid reputation as a SEAL and as a leader, and I'd already deployed to Iraq and run a bunch of really successful, good operations. I got picked up for a commissioning program. I had a great career. And now this horrible thing happened, the worst thing that can happen on the battlefield. And so for me, my ego was the first thing I had to overcome, or I should say the biggest thing I had to overcome. Because for me to say, hey guys, this horrible thing that happened, this was my fault, that stings. And I think that's the hardest thing that people have to deal with. And I think if you can look past what that initial sting feels like, you'll see that in the long run, it's very beneficial. Because if you and I are working together and you're my boss and something goes wrong, and I say, well, hey, sorry, it was Mike over there. It was his fault. And then the next thing goes wrong and I say it was Bill's fault. Well, you're looking at me and thinking, okay, so this guy's not responsible for anything. And eventually you say, well, if you're not responsible for anything, why are you here? Whereas if I say, hey, James, this is what happened. this is the mistakes that we made as a team. I'm responsible for the team, and this is what I'm going to do to fix it next time. You think to yourself, okay, my guy's taking charge of this, and he's going to get it solved.
So now let me take that one step further. You're reporting to me on this, and you're taking blame. Obviously, there's some way also in which I did not strengthen the communication between the two of us. So I need to also share that blame. So what should I say as your leader to kind of share in that responsibility?
Well, this is the classic example. If I'm the boss and I say, James, this project failed, you should have done a better job, you're a disaster, I can't trust you with stuff anymore. Okay, what's your reaction?
Well, I'm going to probably hate you.
There you go. And that's
then,
at the most. I mean, at the minimum, you get defensive. At the maximum, you hate me and you don't want to work with me and you're going to sabotage what's going on. So this was nothing productive here. Whereas if I were to say, hey, James, obviously this project didn't go the way we wanted it to. I think there's some mistakes I made in explaining to you exactly what we were trying to get done and what the parameters are that we wanted to get it done in. And here's the things I want to change next time around to make sure that I do a better job giving you guidance and giving you direction so you can do a better job. Now, most people, their reaction to that is my boss is taking the blame for something that I screwed up. What a good boss. And you know what, boss? Hey, it's not your fault. I should have asked better questions. And so now what we have is we have a whole team where everyone is trying to solve the problems instead of just pointing fingers at each other.
Take a quick break. If you like this episode, I'd really, really appreciate it. It would mean so much to me. Please share it with your friends and subscribe to the podcast. Email me at altucher@gmail.com and tell me why you subscribed. Thanks. I find in most leadership situations like that, what breaks down is ultimately agreements. So you think I agreed to something and I think you agreed to something, because there's a lot of agreements that are written down in the job description and contracts and whatever, but there are a lot of agreements between boss and employee or underling, whatever, where they're implicit agreements. Your understanding of that might be different than mine. And I think as these situations happen, you kind of learn to communicate to develop what these agreements are.
Yeah, and one of the ways I learned to do this in the military, and now I teach this when I'm working with businesses or we're providing consulting services for a business. You're exactly right, and you know this from being in business. You and I can have a phone conversation, and we can both get off the phone, and you can go forward with what you think I said, and I think you're going forward with what I think you heard, and a month down the road, you've done something completely off track. So what I always recommend, and I did this when I was in the military, if you and I have a conversation, when we get off the phone, I'm going to write an email that's going to say, hey, James, just wanted to confirm what we said on the phone. Here's the 3 points, A, B, and C. And here was the timeline we agreed on. Just wanted to make sure that we were on the same sheet. Let me know if you heard anything different so we make sure we're locked on. Boom, problem solved. Same thing, reverse, if I send you an email. Because it's not like email, it's not like, not everyone is the best writer in the world. So I might send you an email that says, hey, James, need you to knock out this, this, and this. And you get the email and you say, cool, got it. I'm going to go do it. Depending on the level of importance of the subject, it might be prudent for me to call you up and say, hey, James, that email I just sent you? I just want to talk through and make sure, we're on the same page, the details, and make sure you're heading in the right direction and make sure I gave you clear guidance because I know I'm not the best writer in the world. And you say, oh, okay, cool. This is what I heard. And now we talk through it. So writing, I think, enhances conversation and conversation enhances writing. And when you have critical decisions that are being passed or directives that are being given, it's best to do both.
Yeah. And, I've run many different businesses and I'm a very non-confrontational person. So often what you're just suggesting is a way to anticipate later confrontation so you don't have to have it. And that's critical.
Yeah, 100%. And most people don't like confrontation, right? Most people don't like confrontation. And
I think that's true. I've never really, now that I think about it, I never really heard someone say, man, I love confrontation. I love firing the shit out of someone.
There are people like that. I mean, there are people that they enjoy, these are the people that no matter what you say, they're going to say they're contrarian, but then they take that to the extreme and all of a sudden they're disagreeing with you or they like to be combative. So there's people like that, but I think they are fairly few and far between. A lot of people, when they don't like having that hard conversation, for instance, you're working for me and you're kind of doing some substandard performance. And I don't really feel comfortable. I mean, you and me, we're bros. So I don't want to go in there and say, hey, James, I know you've been working hard on this, but it's kind of taken a little bit off track of where we want to be. If you could tighten this up and move this over a little bit, we'd be rock solid. And you'd say, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I didn't understand that, but thanks for clarifying. But I don't even want to have that hard conversation. So what happens? We go down another month. And now you're further off track. And now the conversation got harder because now I have to say, James, this is actually in the wrong direction. The work you've put into this hasn't been worth it. And so you need to make a pretty significant shift in what you're doing and throw away some of that stuff that you've worked hard on. So that's an even harder conversation. I don't want to have that one even more. So I let it go. And then finally you end up in this point where I'm going into you and the only conversation, I have to have a conversation because the boss is breathing down my back because we failed to do what we were supposed to do. And guess what our conversation is? James, I'm sorry, I got to let you go. And so I call it, it's like an escalation that you have to have with people. And all the conversations, if you have the hard conversations earlier, they're easier. They're less hostile. The further you go down the path without putting corrective measures on someone, the harder that conversation is going to be, with the final conversation being, hey, I'm sorry, I got to fire you. And by the way, when I have to fire you and I haven't given you any true guidance, I haven't given you any true leadership, I haven't given you clear expectations, I'm going to feel bad when I fire you because inside, I'm going to know that it's actually my fault as the leader. It's my fault. I didn't lead you correctly. You're a good guy. You're a smart guy. You want to do a good job, right? That's what most employees are like. So if you're not doing that, chances are, pretty good chance, it's my fault. That's obviously not saying in every single case because there's people that can't perform the duties that are expected of them. And those people, they need to either find another job or move to another thing that they can handle. But to your point, the hard conversations are hard for everyone to have, not just you.
And so how do you summon up the courage when you need to have those hard conversations? One thing you could tell yourself is what you just said. The earlier I do this, the easier it is. But still, it's like we're bros. It's still hard.
Yeah, it is hard. And it is a lot easier the earlier you do it. And here's what I used to do. So when I got to a point, I went through the escalation because the first thing I'd say to you is, hey, James, can you explain to me why you're doing this over here and how you're going about this? And then that's just a question. I'm just asking you for information. And then I'll have an opportunity to guide you a little bit. Because you said, well, I think that this is the good course to go because of this. And I say, oh, yeah, you might not have thought about that. And so maybe make an adjustment. And you go, oh, yeah, okay, I didn't know that. Cool. That's that's a relatively easy conversation to have.
So the why question.
Right. But what I used to do when I had to have those harder conversations is I made sure that I wrote out the issues and I printed 2 copies, one for me and one for you. And then when you came into my office to talk to me, it's sitting on my desk, but in front of you. You had your copy. There's no way I could back out of it now. And that was a corrective measure of my own from the first time a guy came into my office and I was overcome with cowardice and couldn't have the harder conversation. So I said to myself, okay, how do I overcome that? Oh, I got an idea. When he comes in, it's going to be there and he's going to take that with him. So even if I don't get it out of my mouth, he's got to read it. But once it's there, it's in front of him, you go through the points, they're going to get what you're saying. And again, I would do that further down the escalation of corrective measures. That's not the first time you come to my office, I'm not putting a piece of paper in front of you that delineates every mistake you've made in the last 6 months. I'm not going to do that. That's going to come when we're starting to get to a more significant problem and I need to get you back on track and I want you to be back on track.
So a lot of this, and you discuss this later in the book, but a lot of this is related to the concept of being proactive, to kind of deal with situations before they happen. It reminds me of a story in the hedge fund business. So this guy gets hired by a hedge fund and on day 1, he makes a trade that loses an enormous amount of money. So he goes to his boss, the manager of the hedge fund, and he says, I can't believe I did this. I'm sorry. Can we make back the money quickly so the client doesn't get upset about it? And the boss says, no, we're going to call the client right now and tell him what happened. And so they call the client and we said, we just lost, $10 million for you. Here's what happened. Here's what we're going to do to kind of, make sure it doesn't happen again. The client actually invested more money immediately. So kind of this idea of being proactive as opposed to waiting for the shit to hit the fan is really important in life, whether you're at war or running a business or whatever.
Yeah, and we actually call that aggressive. That's the default mode is going to be aggressive. When a lot of people hear me say, you've got to be aggressive. They're thinking that I'm talking about attacking people with a battle axe. And sometimes I am talking about that. But usually I'm talking about what you're saying, which is I'm going to get aggressive with my client and get aggressive in informing them of what is happening, tell them early, tell them often. I'm going to get aggressive with my employees. Does that mean I'm yelling at my employees? No, it means I'm aggressively keeping them informed of how their performance is going. When I talk about being aggressive, again, I'm not talking about berserker fury with battle axe in hand. I'm talking about being proactive and aggressively forming the course that you want to send people down.
So let's reel it back a little bit. Like, why did you join? You joined the SEALs, I guess, right? And you were 18 years old, so it must have been like 1989. Like, why did you join in the first place?
You know, ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to be some kind of commando. And so, what did you want to do when you were a kid?
I think I wanted to be a writer and interview people.
Well, there you go. I had that feeling when I was a kid, but I didn't want to be a writer or interview people. I wanted to go into combat. And so that's what I did.
And now in 1989, did you get the sense that, I mean, at that time, you know, the Cold War was ending. It seemed like world peace was here forever. Like it almost would have been, and my guess is people joining the military, I mean, military budgets were going down. What did you think, you know, were you kind of geared up all along to join the military, or did you think that you were going to end up in wars, or what were you thinking?
My geopolitical sense of the world at age 18 was pretty minimalistic. And what I thought was, if you're in the SEAL teams, you're going to go fight wars. There's wars going on somewhere. There's a war in Nicaragua. There's a war in South Africa or in Africa. There's wars all over the world. And I'm sure, in my mind, again, this is what I was thinking, in my mind, I'm going to be in the SEAL teams. I'm going to go fight all those wars. So let's do this. And when I got to the SEAL teams in 1991, when I got to SEAL Team 1, there was no war going on. And we call it the dry years because all we did was train a bunch and train some more, and that's what we did.
So you were training basically for 10 years before 9/11.
I was in the SEAL teams for 13 years before I shot my weapon at the enemy.
And was there ever a point where you figured, okay, I've been here 5 years, 6 years, now's the time to do something else?
No, because it was awesome. Even without a war going on, hanging out with these guys that are in the SEAL teams, and even though you're not in combat, you're shooting machine guns, blowing things up, jumping out of airplanes, running on the beach. You show up to work in the morning. We would show up to work. We would train some martial arts for a while and then have a little meeting. And then we'd go work out for 2 hours. And then I was like 35 years old and making good money. In the SEAL teams, you make good money. And I wasn't even wearing a shirt at work. It was just awesome. So no, it was a dream. It was a dream. And you're working with the best guys in the world. And even though the mission, we were waiting for the big mish. So when I got to the SEAL team, because I thought I was going to go to Vietnam. Like I thought I was going to go fight basically the Vietnam War even though it was 1991. But once I realized, that there's no war going on, what are we going to do now? Well, then what we're going to do is we're going to get ready for this big mission, whatever it is. What's a big hostage rescue? There's going to be some missile site that needs to get taken out. And so we just trained really, really hard for that all the time. And it was fun training. And that's what we did.
You have a phrase that you use in a couple different places, which is in both books, The Way of the Warrior Kid and Extreme Ownership. Discipline equals freedom. And I really like that a lot. I think it could be applied to many areas of life. And discipline, in my view, involves having some sort of decision-making process, basically eliminating the complexity of the decisions you make. Okay, this is my discipline, so this is the decision I make in this situation. And so because I've made my decision-making easier, I now have more freedom and more time to do the things I love to do. And so it seems like part of the training is building that discipline, and coming to grips with that discipline equals freedom. Am I kind of saying it correctly, or?
You are, and you just pointed out the fact that discipline equals freedom. It applies to everything, and even as far as being an artist goes. And one of my favorite examples to bring up is Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin. Are you a Led Zeppelin fan?
Yeah, of course.
So Jimmy Page, he was one of the most sought after studio musicians in England. And if you don't know what a studio musician does, they sit and they get told, play these notes for this, commercial that's coming on, or play these notes for this album that's coming out that you're not going to be even recognized on, but you play these notes. And so he just played what he was told to play, and he was highly disciplined and did that all the time, so that by the time he was in Led Zeppelin, he could do whatever he wanted with that guitar because he had had so much discipline in the past, training for those moments when he was going to take a violin. What's that thing called? The violin thing.
I don't know.
The bow.
Yeah, the bow.
From he was going to take that violin bow and play his electric guitar with it. You can't do that unless you're highly disciplined. So it applies in art or music, and it applies to what you just said, to your personal life. If you want to have more free time, then you've got to have the discipline to say no to the things that are going to eat up a bunch of your time.
And you can't come up with the rationales for no on the fly. It has to go back to a discipline, or you list, like in The Way of the Warrior Kid, you list various pages of codes of the Rangers, codes of the SEAL, codes of the Bushido, and whatever code you subscribe to, that kind of helps sort of internalize your own discipline. You don't have to follow someone else's code. You can develop your own, but I think that helps building your own discipline.
Absolutely. I think that even with mission planning in the military, we would have something called commander's intent. And what that really means is, hey guys, this is what I want to get accomplished. This thing here is the end state that we're trying to make happen. And as long as everybody knows what that end state is, they can accomplish it however they want. They can go over the hill, they can go around the hill, they can go through the hill, they can do a various bunch of methods to get there. It's the same thing with life. If you know what you're trying to get to, and just like you said, if you know what your core beliefs are, then when you get confronted with an issue or a question or a problem, and you just know, hey, I'm going to maintain my core beliefs on this, I'm going to follow my code, it's going to make it a lot easier for you.
I wanna hit that actually for a second, but first, this one story about Jimmy Page. He was a studio musician for The Who, and he goes and tells, I forget who within The Who, he says, I'm going to start my own band instead of just hanging out with you guys all the time. And the guy was like, I forget if it was the which person in The Who, but the guy was like, that's going to go down like a sinking ship. And so that's why he named Led Zeppelin, because the Zeppelin, went down.
I heard the story was like metal balloon. Or you're going to crash like a lead balloon or something like that. Yeah. So they named it Led Zeppelin. Yeah, for sure.
And because I guess he knew his skills and he knew he had that discipline, he knew that whatever he did was going to succeed, or he had a strong sense of it.
No doubt.
So, but the phrase end state's interesting because it's not quite the same as a mission statement. An end state is a particular state in mind that you can visualize. Like, this is where I'm going to end up. And then you could kind of backtrack from that and see all the things, not only that you have to do moving forward, but all the contingencies and the things that can go wrong. You bring up this a lot in extreme ownership, particularly in a war situation, but I think in any life situation, lots of things can go wrong along the way of achieving that end state. And you really have to list them out and figure out what you're going to do. And that's what you're saying a leader does.
I don't want to go completely in depth on the military history at this point, but I might a little bit. So there was, the Germans kind of created this idea of decentralized command. They created it after the Battle of Jena, where they got beat by Napoleon, and they just couldn't maneuver their troops fast enough because all they would try and do is the senior leadership would try and control each individual move. And on a battlefield, you can't control these individual moves. They happen so rapidly that your leaders that are in the field need to say, we're getting flanked. We need to move over here. We're going to make it happen. So that's where they came up with this idea of totally decentralized command and this idea of commander's intent, which is very, very similar to end state. And as the U.S. and the rest of the militaries in the world tried to adapt this policy and this concept of decentralized command and using commander's intent to guide people. What the U.S. military did, because the U.S. military is a big bureaucratic machine, is we would make briefings for our operations that would be 100 or 150 PowerPoint slides deep of telling, okay, this is what's going to happen here. Here's our contingency if this happened. Here's our contingency if this happens. These massive plans. And there's a quote that I dug up that, the other specialists in this type of decentralized command looked at kind of how America was doing it and said, because at the end of this whole big briefings, we'd have a little line that said commander's intent. My commander's intent, my end state that I'm going for is this. And this one critic of the way we planned said that the commander's intent shouldn't be one line on the end of a 50-page briefing. It should replace the whole briefing, which is pretty cool.
But I will push back at you for a second, which is that when you're in the chapter on managing upwards, on leading upwards, you kind of do have to put in as much information as possible so that the leaders have faith and don't try to micromanage you, when you're at the finish line already.
100%.
So how do you reconcile the decentralized command where you're kind of giving a lot of trust to the people below you, but also making sure the people above you are fully informed and then they're not going to kind of ask the wrong questions at the last minute?
Well, the people below me in the chain of command, we're going to build up trust. We're going to build up a relationship. And how do you build up trust with somebody? You give them trust. So the way I build up trust with you is I say, hey, James, we got this project. I want you to handle it. Let me know how you want to do it. That you're seeing that I trust you. And now you're putting trust in me, so now my guidance means more. So that's an effective way to build trust.
I like though the phrase, let me know how you want to do it, because that means they now have to communicate back to you. They can't just say, you got it, sir, and then they go off and they come back with something you didn't expect.
Right. I'm going to keep some control. It's going to be a nice indirect control, but I'm going to keep some control. So that way, when you come back to me an hour later and say, hey, here's our overall concept of operations, I say, oh yeah, that's pretty good. Hey, make this one adjustment over there. Or make this little adjustment here. And now you say, oh, okay, got it. But it still feels like your plan. I shouldn't say it feels like your plan. It is your plan. You came up with it. Same thing with people say, how do you get someone to take ownership? The way you get them to take ownership is by giving them ownership. You let them own it. And then they take ownership. Because if I say, hey, James, you're going to do this mission here. Here's how I want you to move into the target. Here's how I want you to go through the target. These are the people I want you to take with you. These are the standards I want you to follow. When you go out and execute that, that's my plan, right?
But so like in chapter 1 of Extreme Ownership, you said, it's my fault. If you have decentralized command and they're off doing their things, even if it's their plan and let's say they mess up, where's the line where it's not your fault anymore?
Well, when you're in charge of something, the line where it's not your fault anymore is when things go great. Then it's their fault. Hey, that was a great operation. You guys did a great job. And when things go wrong, it's going to be your fault. Your other question about micromanagement. And I get asked this all the time. My boss is micromanaging me. How should I overcome it? And I got micromanaged through... The great thing about being in the military is you work for all different kind of bosses. And people get the illusion that just because someone is in the military and they're in a leadership position, they're a great leader. It's complete false. You get the same kind of great leaders in the military and you get idiots in the military. You have both. And you have extreme micromanagers, and you have guys that are completely laissez-faire with letting you do what you want. A point that I always make is that my relationship with all those different bosses was always the same. I had the same relationship with an egomaniac psychopath as I did with a tactical genius. My relationship with them was the same, and that was that they trusted me, they were going to give me what I need, and they were going to let me do what I want.
And what if they didn't trust you? What if the egomaniac psychopath was like, no, Jocko, you're going to go in that building and shoot every man, woman, and child, whether they're friendly or not?
Well, I know you're kind of being facetious, taking it to an example.
I'm exaggerating.
An extreme example where they're asking me to do something that's immoral and unethical. You say, no, not doing it.
Okay.
But if they're saying, hey, we really want you to come in from the west instead of come in from the south to hit this target, I'm going to work with them. But the point is, with all those leaders, I'm going to build up that trust, and I'm going to do it differently with different people, different leaders. I'm going to build up that trust a different way. And an extreme micromanager, the way I always handled extreme micromanagers was I gave them more information than they could possibly want. I gave them so much information and control that they didn't even want that control anymore.
But then what if in your decentralized command, something happens that is not in the micro information you handed your bosses, and they go back to you and said, Jocko, you said this, and this was going to happen. Clearly, your guys did not do it that way.
Well, why would they not be doing something in a way that we planned?
I see, because you're getting your information from, you're saying, let me know how you're going to do it.
Yep. It's decent. I'm getting the plan from the guys that are going to execute. If I'm one of the guys, I'll still let the guys that are below me in the chain of command execute. And again, I don't want to make this sound like it's super easy. It's hard. It's hard being in a leadership position. That's why we have the business we have. The reason we have the business is because every company we go to, from companies that are doing really, really well to companies that are not doing really well, when we come on board, they have leadership issues. And they recognize, somebody at the company recognizes, hey, this problem that we have is a leadership problem. And I'll take that one step further. When you're in a business or you're part of a team or you're in the military and things aren't going the way they're supposed to go, it is a leadership problem. It is a leadership problem. You can talk about process and you can talk about finances and you can talk about spreadsheets, but when you get to the bottom of those things, there's a leader that is not stepping up, taking charge, and making things happen.
Just to add to that, I think there's a leader who's confused about his agreements on both sides, to his bosses and to his employees. There's some things that have been agreed to that haven't been agreed to. So there's two directions I want to go with this. I want to talk about the way of the warrior kid, but I also want to talk about how you kind of live your life personally now, because still you obviously adhere to a discipline. When's the last time you were in the SEALs?
I retired in 2010.
2010. So you've been running Echelon Front since
2010.
So I assume the business is going very well. People are hiring you left and right.
It's been great.
That's good. Congratulations. So what do you do now? Like, what do you wake up at 4:45 or earlier every day?
I wake up at 4:30 every day.
4:30 every day. What if you went to sleep at midnight?
I wake up at 4:30.
And so you're not a believer necessarily that you need 8 hours of sleep a night?
Negative. But the thing is, and people send me these studies and stuff. I'm genetically, I don't need a lot of sleep. And
I've heard that's possible. I heard that some people genetically
So
don't
I have
need.
4 children. My oldest daughter, she's like me. In fact, my oldest daughter, I'd go to bed at 11 o'clock at night and she would be up studying, and I'd wake up at 4:30 and she'd be up studying. And so she doesn't need a lot of sleep. My second daughter, she sleeps incredible amounts to feel rested. So she'll sleep 9-10 hours, like no factor. So there's a genetic component to this. So I don't want to, make people think that, hey, Jocko sleeps 5 hours a night, I'm going to sleep 5 hours a night, because it's probably not healthy. Some people can do it and some people can't. But I think why people have kind of latched onto that a little bit is because intrinsically they know that they don't need to get up at 4:30 in the morning, but they don't need to sleep in until 10. They don't need to sleep in until 8. They can get up and get a lot more stuff done. A lot of laying in bed is some laziness. So, I mean, let's face it. When you're in bed in the morning and the alarm clock goes off, it doesn't always jar me, but a lot of times you don't feel like getting up. So what are you going to do? Go back to bed. Snuggle in with your little pillow. No, not going to do that.
So I'm wondering, I'm someone who feels like I need 8 hours of sleep or more. How can I get a little better? I'd like to sleep 7 hours a night or 6 hours a night and feel fully rested.
I do think, depending on what your lifestyle's like, when people
I
tell
don't
me,
really drink. I don't go out and go to parties or anything.
I think it definitely lifestyle. The healthier you are, the less sleep you need. I think the better you eat and the cleaner you eat, the less sleep you need. But bro, I'm not trying to say you should sleep 5 hours a night. You might need 8 hours, and that's cool. I have nothing against you. What I have an issue with, and what I think people personally have an issue with, is they know that they could get more done. They know that the only reason they slept in was because they didn't want to get up.
I do feel like genes also, even if something's genetics, you still can work within genetics too. There's a spectrum. Like if your genes say you need 8 hours of sleep, there's still things you could do. Like for instance, clean eating that might boost you a half hour in the right direction or an hour. And so I'm just trying to figure out for myself how I can, because you're right, I can get an hour more worth of writing done if I get up an hour more reading done.
And I don't know, but when I sleep 8 hours, I actually feel groggy. And when I sleep 5 hours, 5.5 hours, 6 hours, I feel really good. 5.5 hours is solid. 5 hours, I start feeling it a little bit. Less than 5, I'll feel it.
You don't drink coffee, right?
No.
So, but you do, and it's funny you do this because I just bought some off of Onnit Alpha Brain.
Mhm.
I just bought them about a week ago, and I've been taking them, but I don't know if it works or not. Do you feel that it works?
You know, I don't know if it's placebo. I take them. I take them when I'm going to do something that's going to require some sort of mental acuity. And again, can I confirm it? No, I haven't done a double-blind placebo test myself, but maybe there's some placebo effect that makes me like it. I don't drink coffee. I drink tea. I drink white tea. And so I can feel, and I don't drink it all the time. So when I drink tea, I can feel the caffeine. I can feel it. It's very impactful to me when I drink caffeine.
So you kind of tactically use it.
I
So
tactically
if
use
you're
it.
going to hang out for the day with your kids, you might not have caffeine, or maybe you do, but I don't know.
No, I'm not going to.
But then if you're going to go out and do like a bunch of talks or meetings, you might, kickstart the day with some caffeine.
Right.
So again, under the guise of discipline equals freedom, what's part of your current daily discipline?
I wake up early and I work out every day. That's the main thing. There's no big, eureka moment. Talk to anybody that does anything, and I've seen you say it. Wake up early and do some physical activity. It's good for your brain. It's good for your body. Again, no eureka moment there. I get up every morning early and I work out.
So in Way of the Warrior Kid, it basically starts off where there's this kid who's kind of the quote unquote the main, Uncle Jake's nephew, or the main character is the nephew, and it's told from his point of view. He is sort of wimpy, like kids are picking on him. He can't do his times tables. Like he's wimpy in a variety of ways. And then Uncle Jake comes to visit and starts giving him discipline. And through that discipline, the kid finds freedom because now he doesn't have to worry about the big kids. He doesn't have to worry about the teachers. That's a kind of freedom also. So, but part of that is Uncle Jake wakes him up every morning. Like you kind of get him on that discipline. And what other kind of techniques are you using with the kid to, or not you, I shouldn't say you. What kind of techniques is Uncle Jake using?
Somebody asked me about, your Uncle Jake. I responded the other day. I said, well, actually, Uncle Jake is an extremely flawless version of everything I could hope to be, right? That's Uncle Jake. And yeah, that's what he does, is he gets him on a program. He says, oh, you want to do pull-ups? Then we're going to do pull-ups. You want to learn how to swim? Then we're going to go down to the river 3 times a week and we're going to start teaching you how to swim and we're going to get you there. You want to learn your times tables? Okay, we're going to make flashcards. We're going to review them every day. We're going to put you on a stopwatch so you can get done, so you get really super confident. Anything you put a timer on makes everyone freak out. We used to do that a lot of shooting drills when I was in the SEAL teams. Everyone's shooting really solid with your pistol or with your rifle, and you're hitting your target every time, and then all of a sudden they break out the timer that times you, and now you're competing with everyone, and all of a sudden people start throwing shots all over the place. So you put the kid on the timer on the flashcards. And then the last one is, the kid's getting picked on, and so his uncle takes him and teaches him, takes him to a jiujitsu school where he starts learning grappling.
How long before, let's say someone, I'm just curious about this is even almost unrelated to the podcast, but let's say someone goes to a jiu-jitsu class and somebody else is, because he or she is dealing with someone picking on them, or they want to feel a little bit more confident in self-defense. How long in the jiu-jitsu class do they learn enough kind of skills or techniques or training before they can feel confident handling themselves with someone else?
It happens very rapidly. And again, there's so many different variables here, but a normal person, let's say a 23-year-old male, if he learns jiu-jitsu for 6 months, he's going to handle himself in 95% of street fights or altercations. One of the best things that he's going to get out of it is he's going to become more aware of what's happening, and he's going to realize that there's a 5% of the people out there that, even though he knows a bunch, is going to destroy him in a street fight. You get somebody that wrestled at Iowa and you know a little jujitsu for 6 months, that person's going to pick you up and slam you on your head and possibly give you brain damage. So you get that. But, I own a jujitsu, a mixed martial arts school in San Diego, and we have had all kinds of kids come through there. A lot of them that start training is because they're getting picked on. And, there's several cases, one I'm thinking of off the top of my head where the dad came in and said, "Hey, my son's getting picked on, and will this help him?" And I said, "Yes, it will." And 6 months later, one of the kids, it wasn't the kid himself that was getting picked on. It was another kid that was being picked on by one of these bullies. And this kid stepped in and handled it and choked the kid. And, then called the teacher and said, "Hey," and all the other kids said, "Yeah, this bully was picking on us again. And little Jimmy over here somehow made him go to sleep." And, that's one of the things you learn in jiu-jitsu. You learn how to do that, but you also learn the power of it. You learn when you need to stop and how you can really hurt somebody with jiu-jitsu. So you need to be very careful with it. But yeah, once you learn it, it's a very powerful, one of my kids, there's a movie called The Incredibles. Did you ever see that movie?
Yeah.
So one of my kids, is my son actually, when he was, 6 years old or something, he said, "Hey Dad, is there really such a thing as superpowers?" And I said, my first thought was no. And then I said, "Yes, there is. Jiu-jitsu. It's like a superpower because you can defeat people and you don't have to cower down to them. And it teaches you, it does give you real confidence. And that's what happens in the book. And, the book, his confidence grows so much because he's fighting people on a daily basis in his jiu-jitsu school. And that gives you confidence that you can handle yourself. And once you build up that confidence, the percentage of times that you actually have to utilize these skills goes down dramatically because, and I think that's one of the things going beyond that age, what happens to boys when they turn 14, 15, 16, all of a sudden they're looking to prove themselves. All of a sudden, for me, when I was that age, it was, how can I prove that I'm tough? And I think that happens to, how can I prove that I'm a tough guy? Oh, I can get in a fight. Oh, I can, and that's what happens. Well, if you're training jiu-jitsu or you're training boxing, you're training wrestling, or you're training Muay Thai, if you're training one of these real martial arts that makes you fight other people, you don't need to prove yourself. You're proving yourself in the gym every day. So I think it gives kids, I think it gives 14, 15, 16-year-old boys real toughness so they don't have to go out and try and prove their toughness in some other method. There's no manhood drill in America anymore, or American culture. There's no, those cultures where they jump off with a vine tied to their leg. You jump off the 40-foot tower and stop right before you hit the ground. There's no ceremony like that. We don't have that. So how does a young boy prove that he's turning into a man? Because there's some instinct in the back, at least there was in my mind. In the back of my mind, I wanted to prove I was tough. I wanted to prove I could protect the tribe when I was a kid. So how do you do that? You go get in a fight with someone. And that's not going to be healthy. It's not a healthy way to grow up.
Were you kind of like the bully as a little kid?
No. I was a little kid. I was a very scrawny kid. And so, no, I got picked on. I got bullied. It wasn't some extreme example that scarred me mentally or anything, but who didn't? When you're a freshman in high school, you're going to get slammed into the lockers. People are going to knock the books out of your hands. They're going to pull your pants down while you're standing in the lunch line. That's the kind of bullying that I'm talking about. I'm not trying to make this big thing like I was being aggressively bullied, but I was a 13-year-old boy in America. And when you're a 13-year-old boy in America, or in any culture that I've seen, you're going to get picked on. And so what are you going to do about it? Well,
run. I ran.
Yeah, you can run. And there's sometimes when you can't run, though. And for me, I didn't want to run. I wanted to stand up for myself. And unfortunately, I didn't really know what I was doing. So I had to bear it. I had to live through it. And then what happens then? To your question, was I a bully? No, I wasn't a bully. I was empathetic to what it felt like when those kids were getting picked on. And so, I didn't do that.
So I want to talk a little bit about your time in Iraq. Like, you were there 2004, 2005. I'm pretty sure I'm getting the years right. And here we are, 2017. And I'm sure you've been asked this. We're kind of still there. We're kind of still in all these places. These are longer conflicts now than Vietnam was. Where did leadership break down in our attempts to help, what we thought was an evil situation? And the flip side of that is, when is something evil enough that America has to decide, okay, we're going to go into this country, but not this country? Like, for instance, we didn't go into Rwanda when there was a genocide going on there, but we went into Iraq when there was evil, but where was the line? Why did we go there and not other places?
Well, to break down those specific situations in Rwanda, I was actually sitting off the coast of Rwanda, ready and prepared to go in when 800,000 Tutsis were killed primarily with machetes in a 100-day period. And, it was an absolute nightmare of a situation. And I don't know how familiar you are with it, but one of the things that I found most disturbing about the genocide in Rwanda is that the Hutus and the Tutsis, there's no way to tell them apart, right? So they speak the same language. They are the same race of people.
They were living on the same street. They were going to the same schools. They were living on the same street.
They had the same religion, right? Which was Catholic. And the only way that I would know that you were a Tutsi is if I knew you. I had to know you. I couldn't just look at you and figure it out. I couldn't listen to the way you talk and figure it out. I had to know you. I had to know your family. And so that, to me, this wasn't killing where, hey, I'm just killing this guy because he's a different color than me, or I'm not killing this guy because he speaks a different language than me. The only way for me to know that I should kill him is because I have to know him. I have to know him as a person. So that's really, really disturbing. Now, I would say the primary reason why we didn't go in to Rwanda is because this was in 1994, and in 1993, we had the Black Hawk Down situation in Somalia. And so we lost a lot of soldiers in that situation. It was an out-of-control situation. Things went really bad. And I think the overall stomach in America was, hey, we don't need to do that again. And so, hey, we're not going to go there. But of course, as time goes by, those feelings fade and we forget that war is a horrible thing and that horrible things happen in war. And enough time goes by that we see another bad situation and we say, okay, let's go fix this. And, that's one of the reasons why the public in America and the government in America said, you know what, we should go into Iraq and help these people.
And I mean, our idea of nation building clearly didn't work. So regardless of, let's say, political beliefs, I mean, now it's been Republican, Democrat, Republican administrations. Somehow or other, we're not making it click in there. We're not, and we've upset the balance of the Middle East. Like Iraq was sort of our buffer against Iran for a long time. In some cases, we armed Iraq. We knew who Saddam Hussein was in the 80s, but we gave him all his military equipment. So where, again, do you think leadership went wrong and, or not? Like, what's the situation?
So from my perspective,
and I understand this is not like, you don't have to be an expert on this. I'm just curious.
Well, I mean, I spent, what was it? I spent 9 years of my life in wartime military. And so we learn a lot about this and we study it all the time. And from my perspective, when we go to war, the biggest thing about going to war is when you go to war, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, you have to have the will. And there's actually two types of will that you need to have when you go to war. The first one is the will to kill. And that sounds pretty easy because, okay, there's bad guys, we're going to go kill the bad guys. But it's not that easy because war isn't that easy. Because when you start killing people, you're not just going to be able to specifically kill the bad guys, and there's going to be innocent casualties. There's going to be innocent civilians. There's going to be women and children that die in war.
And there's also going to be, let's say, military on the other side who they're trying to kill you, but they're still just 18-year-old kids.
For sure.
Who are not necessarily, it's just a circumstance that they happen to be on the other side of you.
For sure. And you have to have the will to kill those people. Because if you're going to war, that is how you win, is by killing the enemy. And when you kill the enemy, there's going to be civilians that die. And that is awful. That is awful. The other will that you need to have is the will to die. Because if you think that you're going to be able to go into a wartime situation and fight against those other 18-year-old kids and that they're not going to kill some of you, you're wrong. You are going to lose people. You're going to lose American men and now women in war. So if you don't have those two types of will, then you need to really question what you're going in to try and make happen. And you need to have a very clear picture of what it is that you're trying to make happen. So in Iraq, one of the things that when I talk about this subject is I like to at least give some indication to people of what it was like on the ground. Because what it was like on the ground was not portrayed in the media. It was not portrayed in the media. And life in the Middle East is not portrayed well in the media. But when we were in Ramadi in 2006, it was a horrible war zone. And it was a horrible war zone. The area was pretty much controlled by insurgents. And these insurgents, and there were still, there's still hundreds of thousands of people that lived in Ramadi, normal people. And again, I always have to explain what a normal Iraqi family is like, because a normal Iraqi family, Americans don't know what a normal Iraqi family is like. A normal Iraqi family is a normal family. They're just a normal family. There's a dad, there's a mom, there's kids, they have a job, they're trying to do improvements on their house, they're trying to save up for a new car, they want their kids to be educated and live a better life than them. That's what a normal Iraqi family is. And in Ramadi, there was 400,000 people. Some of them had fled while we were there, but let's call it 300,000, maybe 200,000 people that were living this, that were normal, that just wanted to live in peace. And they were being reigned over by these heinous, evil insurgents that were literally beheading fathers and skinning people alive and burning people. It was awful. And so when we showed up, the first reaction from the local populace was, we better not talk to the Americans, because if the insurgents see us talking to the Americans, they're going to come and kill our whole family.
Were the insurgents there, and this shows my lack of understanding, were the insurgents there before you were there?
Yes and no. So there was some insurgents or prior military or Saddam loyalists that were there that turned into insurgents. There were some that came in, foreign fighters from other countries that were going to go get their jihad on. And a lot of the Iraqi insurgents were looking for power. They were looking for, Al-Qaeda's going to come in here and take over? Okay, well, we better get in good with them. So how do we do that? And so some of those guys would say, okay, well, we'll help you. We'll help you do what you're trying to do. We'll help you fight the coalition. As soon as the coalition took a strong stand in Ramadi and started to defeat the insurgents, the local populace said, okay, thank you. And they were great. And we worked with all kinds of locals. When we showed up there was, I think, 30 Iraqi police officers, of which we probably saw 3 of them because none of them would come into work. And a year later, there was about 2,400 Iraqi police that were now in charge of their city, and they were keeping it clean and keeping it free of violence. And the violence completely dropped off. And Ramadi was really the poster child of counterinsurgency, because it completely turned around in about a year and a half period. And then it held with probably less crime than many American cities and less violence than many American cities for about 7 years, until the embers of the insurgents that were still glowing, little glowing embers, they started to grow once we pulled out. Once we pulled out, there was, a power vacuum.
What do you think we could have done? It's obvious we can't stay in there forever.
Well, we don't need to stay somewhere forever, but, I had a woman ask me that similar question the other day, and I said, if you were home and you had a fire in your kitchen, and then you took the fire extinguisher and you put the fire out, and then you looked at your watch and there was a movie that you were going to go see, would you leave and go to the movie with this still smoke in the kitchen? No, you wouldn't. You'd stay there. You'd make sure it was out. You'd replace whatever you needed to replace. You'd put out all the embers. You'd scrape them out. You'd make sure that the problem is gone before you walk away. It's if you had cancer. If you had cancer in your body and I did surgery on you, And I said, okay, I got the cancer out. Are you going to come back and see me again and do the blood test to make sure that that cancer is gone? Yes, you are. And if it's still in there, it's going to be smaller, but we're going to go and attack those little pieces that are still there. So that's what it is. We needed to stay, and you say we can't stay there forever. We've been in Germany. We're still in Germany. We've been in Japan, for many, many years, and Korea. We're there in support in Korea, so we can stay there for a long time.
And so where's the line when many countries and all these other continents have dictatorships or leaderships that are, what you could say is evil? They do things that wouldn't necessarily follow our ethical code. Where's the line where America has to say, okay, we're going to go in now and do something about it?
I think we have to look at our own security and see how this country threatens our security. And you have to look at it from a humanitarian perspective as well.
Is that because we have the resources and other countries don't? So that gives us a responsibility?
I feel like we have the responsibility. I mean, when those people were getting killed in Rwanda, do we have some responsibility? Is it okay for us as a nation just to look the other way when 800,000 people are butchered with machetes in 100 days? When we could have relatively easily put a stop to it. Now, it's hard to know that, right? But that's the kind of judgment that our nation needs to make. And part of that judgment is 800,000, you tell me, are 800,000 civilian people in Rwanda if we lose 10 Americans trying to fight them or trying to put it to a stop? If we lose 10 Americans, what's the number? I don't know. You tell me. What's your opinion? Is it 1 American? I'll tell you, 1 American is every American that gets lost in combat is a heartbreaking travesty. It's horrible.
Yeah, and I mean, you've lost friends in Iraq and throughout your military career. And, to answer your question, I guess I don't know. Like, philosophically, it's easy for me to say there's no justification or there's this or that or here's where the line is. But then I think, well, what if my daughter, who's now 18, wanted to go into Iraq and do things? I don't know how I would react. Like, I don't know if I would, obviously, she's an adult. I can't stop her from doing anything, but I don't know if I would let her. Like, I'd be scared.
What was she trying to do?
Let's say she wants to fight evil. Let's say she sees evil and she sees this as a way to help. And, let's say she says everything. She wants to, this is potentially dangerous for America. She wants to help for various strategic reasons. She wants to help stop the evil that's happening to women over there in a worst case scenario. She wants to help people from stop being beheaded. She wants to do everything she can. But like you say, there's always the potential she has to have the will to die to do that. I'd be scared.
No doubt about it. And I think a lot of times people forget that because it's not their kids that are going to war. It's someone else's kid that is going to war. And
so that's why leadership could potentially break down at the top level. If somebody, whether it's Congress or a president, and I'm not making any judgments against anybody because I don't really know the answers, but it does sometimes happen where it's a breakdown because people don't have skin in the game.
I would say, could that happen? Yes, that could. There's advisors to the politicians that are military guys, and I'll tell you right now, a lot of times I think military guys get the reputation of being hawkish and pro-war, when the fact of the matter is, I can promise you, there's no one that understands the loss of these kids better than people that have been in situations where they've lost their men, their friends, their brothers, and so they weigh that very, very heavily.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because, like guys like Colin Powell, for instance, he wavered, throughout his career between war situations and no, we can't go in there. So that's an example where someone has taken both sides and tried to navigate these difficult decisions. So I respect that a lot. And I think it's just a very complicated issue.
Yeah, I will tell you that from my perspective, I talked about being aggressive earlier. The last time I got into a street fight?
No.
I don't even remember. It's been a long time. Why is that? I'm big, I'm strong, I know how to fight. That means when people see me, potential opponents, some drunk guy walking down the street, if you and I are walking down the street a block apart and there's a drunk bunch of idiots, they're not going to say anything to me. They're going to see you and they're going to go, hey, you know what? Let's talk some smack to this guy.
Right.
So I think as a nation, that's how I want to be perceived. I want to be perceived that we have strength, that if somebody causes problems with us, we will effectively smash them. And I believe that the more that we have that image, and it can't just be an image, the more that is the reality, the less we will have to use our military and our blood in other parts of the world.
And I guess that goes along with your discipline equals freedom statement. So we obviously want freedom to never fight a war, but in order to do that, we kind of have to show other countries, and I'm echoing you, we kind of have to show the other countries that we have the discipline if we need it.
Yes, we need to show people that we have the will, that if they do things that are out of line, then we won't stand for it. And when people recognize that, when the rest of the world recognizes that, it'll make us a safer place and we'll have to use our military less, in my opinion. Again, who am I? I'm just some guy talking on your podcast, but that's my opinion.
But you've been there, you've seen it, you've done it, you've seen the worst, lived through it. So I ask you because I value your opinion on this. And it's a question that I'm sure everybody thinks about, and everybody kind of throws out answers and solutions, and they argue about it in op-eds, and it's just all stupid, most of the opinions out there on either side.
Just to summarize, to make it clear, I'm not a guy that's sitting here saying, let's go to war. I don't want to go to war anywhere. You know why? Because I know these guys that are going to war. They're my friends. And you know what? I've got one son. He's probably going to go in the military. That's going to be him. I don't want, like I said, people that have been in the military, they're the ones that are saying, hey, let's think twice about what we're doing. But again, I think in order to deter evil actors in the world, they need to understand that there's consequences that America will impose on them if they do things that are beyond what human beings should be doing to each other.
So I wanted to talk to you about one thing, which I believe very strongly in, which is you have to be proactive when you're managing down in terms of firing people in a leadership situation, or in terms of getting rid of people in some way or moving them around. And you have this one story where two managers underneath the CEO are both blaming each other and they're acting up, and the advice is fire them both. And I agree with that very strongly. As someone who's run companies, I always noticed if one person is a problem, that's like a cancer, and they're out there taking smoking breaks with the other employees, and the cancer spreads. And you have to kind of, if you can't solve the problem very quickly, you have to eliminate the cancer or it spreads. And, I think that's proactive. And I'm just curious, where you kind of picked up that instinct.
Well, that definitely was something that I saw when I was in the military. There was a leader and a subordinate leader that couldn't get along. And hey, I can't get along with this guy. I can't work with this guy. I can't work with him either. And the commanding officer said, okay, it's Friday. When you guys come back in on Monday, have a solution of how you're going to work together. And I think that was completely fair. They came in on Monday and they both held the ground. I can't work with him. I can't work with him. And the commanding officer said, okay, you're both fired. And it kind of surprised me because it was a very aggressive move by the commanding officer to fire two leaders that were getting ready to deploy. But he did it. And I get asked the question a lot of, hey, I've got this guy that I'm working with and he's an egomaniac and he's my peer, so I can't really do anything. And what should I do? And I want to tell the boss. And to me, that's a real indicator. When you've got somebody that's good, has a lot of potential, they can work with anybody. I could work with, you're a hyper aggressive, angry guy. I'm going to work with you. We're going to make things work. Oh, you're a laid back guy that really won't be too aggressive in making things happen. That's okay. I'm going to compliment what you've got going on and I'm going to make it good and we're going to get things done. And I'm going to share the credit with you. I'm not looking to take the credit. I'm sharing the credit with you and we're going to move forward. So I think it's a real indicator when I got a guy that works well with the aggressive guy and he works well with this passive guy and he works well with this egomaniac and he works well with all those people. That guy, I'm actually looking to promote that guy. But the other guy who, I can't work with this guy. I can't work with this guy, he's too aggressive. I can't work with this guy, he's too passive, doesn't get anything done. I can't work with this guy, his ego's too big. That guy is basically raising a flag and alerting me to the fact that I'm not going to put him to a leadership position. Because every human being that you work with is going to have issues, is going to have problems. They're crazy. right? People are, all people, they're crazy. They do crazy, inexplicable things. And you look at them and you say, I can't believe this person's doing that. But what are you going to do? You're going to work through it. You're going to find a way to get the best out of everyone that you have on your team.
So, a lot of people write to me and say, oh, I'm feeling stuck. I'm behind the cubicle. I've been working here for 30 years. I don't like my boss. I don't like my job. I wish I could do things, what I want to do in life, but I have mortgage and this and that. What would you recommend, your extreme ownership plus the discipline equals freedom, which, it's all related. What would you recommend are kind of like the first steps, someone listening to this right now, someone saying, okay, this is easy for Jocko. He trained for 20 years and now he's building this business based on his training. Like it's all kind of flowing together. He's doing what he loves. What if somebody's listening to this saying, I want to do what I love, but I don't know how? I don't know what the first step is.
So interestingly, a guy on Twitter, probably a year ago, sent me that, 140 characters. I hate my job, want to do something else, stuck. What should I do? He sent me something like that. I wrote back, come up with an exit strategy, execute. And I didn't remember this, right? It was something I tweeted to a guy at 11:30 at night one night. And whatever, 6 months later or 9 months later, he reported back and he said, I came up with an exit strategy. I executed. I started this company, or what, I forget exactly what he did, but he made the move. And so that's my advice. When something is happening in your life that you don't like, okay, well, what are you going to do about it? Come up with an exit strategy. I don't promote quit your job tomorrow morning and get rid of all your stuff, to have somebody sell all your things in your house and don't own anything. I don't recommend that. You can move in that direction. But what I recommend is come up with an exit strategy, a legitimate exit strategy. I'm going to need this much money in the bank, or I'm going to get rid of this stuff, lower my overhead on my daily, weekly, or monthly basis. I'm going to lower my overhead, and then I'm going to come up with an exit strategy. And then you execute it.
And so it's sort of like...
And I'll tell you one more thing, is when you're grinding for the man, right? If that's all you're doing, it's gonna burden you and it's not gonna be fun. Once you say, hey, I'm grinding it for the man, but I'm putting money away and this is part of my exit strategy. Now all of a sudden you're working hard because you want to get more money so you can execute your exit strategy. Next thing you know, you might turn around and figure out that you're good at your job and that works out well. Or the other side of the spectrum, you still hate your job, but you saved money and now you execute your exit strategy.
So it's sort of like come up with this exit strategy, but the key word is do. Every day, do. Like a lot of people kind of sit and think about it or come up with the excuses or come up with the blaming. But I think the important thing is every day do something. And I see this even with all the things that I do. I can sit around and read, but I won't write anything unless I actually sit down in front of a keyboard and type.
What's the hardest part about sitting down at the keyboard and starting to write?
I would say telling myself I have to do it, putting the gun to my head that I have to do it.
The hardest part in just about any task is starting it, right? For me, because, I've written a couple, but I haven't written 37 books like you have or whatever, but I've written
close
2 books while I was working, while I was doing other things. And what I did was like, okay, I have to write. The hardest part of it is opening up the laptop, opening up your word processor and starting to type. Once you're starting to type, okay, well, you're just in the zone and you make it happen. And and people say, what do you do when you hit a writer's block or a creative? I don't care. Write anyways. Keep writing. Just do it. Just do the thing. Same thing with working out. What if you don't feel like working? It doesn't matter. The hardest part is getting into the gym. Once you're in the gym, what are you going to do? Lay on the floor and not do anything? No, you're going to finish. You're going to do something. And that something is infinitely better than nothing. And for this exit strategy that you're working on, you have to do something, like you said, every day so that you're making progress towards your goal. Now, I talk, people get into the big goal thing and all this, and I don't really want to go down that road. But, you have your long-term goal and that long-term, it's like shooting a gun. I've told this story before. When you shoot a gun, when you're looking at a target that's far away, after a couple seconds of looking at it, it becomes blurry in your vision. It's just, you get like your eyes water up a little bit. You just can't maintain that long distance focus. So what you do is when you shoot, you look at the front side of your weapon, which is, 3 feet away from your eyeball. And the same thing happens with people's lives where they've got this long-term goal, but it's so far away that it gets blurry and they kind of lose track of it. And so, they might, if they think about it on a Friday night after a hard week at work and they go, this job sucks and I want to do something else. I don't want to be under this grind anymore. I don't want to grind for the man anymore. But then Monday, that gets a little bit fadey, and Tuesday, so they're just doing what they have to do. If they take that long-term goal, they keep it there, but then they say, okay, look, what's something I can do today? What's something I can do tomorrow? What's something I can do the next day? You know what? I'm going to have my resume. I'm going to build my resume this week. I'm going to have a good resume together. Or I'm going to put together my business plan. I'm going to do that this week. Or I'm going to save this much money. I'm going to work this extra. I'm going to go deliver pizzas and put a little bit money in the kitty. That's what I'm going to do. So you can't let the long-term goal be the only thing that's driving you, because sometimes it's so far away that it gets blurry. So bring some short-term goals that you can actually execute on a daily or weekly basis so you can move forward. Like I wrote, people say, how long does it take you to write those books? I'll tell you right now. I think this one's 30,000. The kid's book is like 30,000 words. I write 1,000 words a day. That's 30 days. Book's done. Next book. And do I throw away some of those words? Of course I do. Do I have to go back and edit the heck out of them? Yes, I do. But they're going to be there. And then I have that raw material to work with, and I can shape it and clean it up and dial it.
I think people don't realize that. If you write, for instance, 1,000 words a day, right?
Which takes like 45 minutes to an hour, by the way.
Right. So that's 365,000 words a year. That's kind of like 7 or 8 books.
That's
like
the Gulag Archipelago.
People don't realize that it's not, I don't want to say it's easy to write a book, because it's not. It's very hard to write a good book. But you can write a book easily in a year. We don't know good or bad. You improve over time, and you study the books written by others, and you put your best effort into it. But you still have to write the book, and those 1,000 words a day. That's the discipline equals freedom. Like, you don't have to worry about, am I going to get a book done, if you know you're going to do 1,000 words a day.
Yep.
So first off, I want to again recommend, Way of the Warrior Kid. This was a great book for me to read. So I'm 49 years old. I'm not a kid, but this is a great book because I think it really encapsulates a lot of the strategies you talk about in Extreme Ownership, which is also a great book to read. So I recommend both. Way of the Warrior Kid just came out. Extreme Ownership's been out for a while, but the lessons always apply. What are some other books you would recommend? Just, I don't know, on leadership, personal improvement, whatever.
The number one book that I always recommend when I get asked this question is a book called About Face, which is written by Colonel David Hackworth, who was an Army soldier, started off as an enlisted guy, was at the tail end of World War II, didn't fight, but kind of learned lessons from the World War II veterans in Europe. Then he was in Korea and he was in Vietnam. And he is a very controversial figure. He is the first guy, the first kind of senior officer in Vietnam that said to the public, we're not going to win with this strategy that we're utilizing. And it's a huge book, 700 something pages. And it's not a book about leadership. It's a book about his life. But he was a great leader. And so when you read his book, you get just an incredible, if you're looking for the leadership lessons, there's leadership lessons on every single page. When I was in Iraq on my last deployment, for the first 3 months of deployment, when I'd go up to my room at night, I'd just open it up to a random page and read it, and there would be some immediate lesson learned that I would be able to apply. And then after 3 months, I needed something else. I was like full on, okay, I understand what's going on in war. I need to do something else for another half an hour.
Then you're Harry Potter.
It was the electric Kool-Aid acid test.
Okay, Tom Wolfe.
Yeah. And that was, I found it. Somebody had left it there randomly. And that was the book that I read. And then I just read that book. And then I went back to About Face. But that was a great book too. And there were some incredible things to learn about people in that book. The other book that I always recommend is Blood Meridian.
Oh yeah, Cormac McCarthy, great book.
Yeah. To me, I think that's
maybe one of the best written books ever.
I believe it is. I was an English major in college. And so obviously I read a ton and didn't read Cormac McCarthy in college, but, read everything else, read a lot of Shakespeare. And Cormac McCarthy was the first author that I said, because Shakespeare is just Shakespeare. And Cormac McCarthy was the first person that I read that I said, this guy is at that level of depth in his writing. So Blood Meridian, and the rest of his books are awesome too, but Blood Meridian to me is sort of a step above.
I like The Road also,
The
his
Road
dystopian
is
book.
Unbelievably good.
Yeah.
Unbelievably good.
Any others?
I read on my podcast, I review books. And so I review books about war primarily. And there's so many incredible books that it's hard to narrow down. One of the things about, we all have little problems in life. And you open this whole podcast talking about how I'd been in all these intense situations and all that. And the fact of the matter is, when you compare what I did in my military career compared with so many other military, both enlisted people, officers, leaders, troops, they've done infinitely more than me. And I had I did what I could in my career, but there's, you look at the Battle of Guadalcanal or, the battles in World War I, and the things that those guys suffered through and went through is just, it's incredible. And I had a gentleman on my podcast who was a pilot in Vietnam. He was shot down 2 times. The second time that he was shot down, he was captured, and he ended up in the Hanoi Hilton, which was the Hanoi Hilton because it was actually nice. He was in South Vietnam, marching up to the north and held in bamboo cages with no food, starved, tortured, wake up in the middle, wounded when he was shot down, and he'd wake up in the middle of the night and there would be rats eating at his wounds. So when you know that people can get through situations like that, and here I was on when he came on my podcast, and he's got a book called Through the Valley, and I'm reading these excerpts from his book about things that happened to him, about these rats eating at his wounds, about mock executions that happened to him. But to me, my podcast it's about war and it's about leadership, but ultimately what it's about human nature. And it's about the way people interact. When you want to learn about human nature, I'm not going to say it's the best place to learn about human nature, but war certainly amplifies the visibility of human nature, and it makes it very clear to see. And so I like to study that and read books about that, because at a minimum, when you look at your own life, there's not too many people that are in a worse situation, at least in America, of being locked in a 2-foot-tall bamboo cage with their feet shackled and having rats gnaw at their wounds. And the fact that human beings can suffer through that and survive and come back and be awesome citizens and very humble and live meaningful lives is just, it means a lot to me. And it makes me realize that we really are blessed to be in the situations that we're in. And, I'm quoting one book, but I've done 70-something podcasts, and most of them have pretty incredible stories that human beings have lived through and survived, and also, those that didn't survive. And I always want to pay a tribute and honor to those that sacrificed their lives to give us this opportunity that we have now to sit in New York City, drinking white tea and recording a podcast about life. So I feel lucky to be here.
I do as well, Jocko, and I'm really grateful you came on the show. Jocko Willink, thanks a lot. And again, Way of the Warrior Kid and Extreme Ownership, How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win. I recommend them both. They both have been useful to me in ways I didn't expect. So I really appreciate you writing these books. So thanks a lot.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
TV has thousands of free movies and TV shows.
What? This is the mindset. Free. This is the mantra. Free. This is the mindset.
With movies like Joe Dirt, Pixels, and 50 First Dates. This is awesome. And TV shows like Survivor, SpongeBob SquarePants, The Fairly Odd Parents, and Ghosts. Pluto TV is always free.
Huzzah!
Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.
You're welcome.